Well, all right, so we're going to be in the book of Amos tonight. And first of all, we're going to just do some introductory material. I always like to let you guys know something about the book before we start in it. Amos is 9 chapters long, so it's longer than the last couple of books that we've been in. It's one of the longer of the minor prophets, but there's a consistent theme throughout Amos, and that is the judgment of the nations. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about Amos. Who was Amos to start with? And we see in chapter 1, verse 1, the words of Amos, who was among the shepherders from Tekoa, which he envisioned in visions concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. All right, so we have a very specific timeline here. Now, when we went through the book of Joel, no timeline at all. We have no idea when Joel prophesied. It might have been right after King David. It might have been right before the fall of Judah to Babylon. We don't know when he prophesied. We don't know who he was, where he lived, anything about him. But that's not the case with Amos. He was a shepherd. He was a shepherd from Tekoa. That's a little village about 10 miles south of Jerusalem. And he gives us the timeline. Jeroboam was the king of the northern kingdom, and Uzziah was the king of the southern kingdom. So we've talked about this in the past, that after kings Saul, David, and Solomon, the kingdoms, the tribes of Israel were not united. There was a division in the kingdom. There was the northern kingdom, which separated the 10 tribes of the north. They separated, and they were the nation of Israel. Then there were the 2 southern tribes of Judah. So you have Israel to the north. Jeroboam is the king up there, and the southern kingdom is Uzziah, and he's the king there. So Amos is from the southern kingdom, but he goes to the northern kingdom to prophesy. Most of the prophets were prophets to the northern kingdom. So that's what we see, and it gives us this timeline of the kings, so we know that he prophesied somewhere between 750 and 760 BC. So he was right before Isaiah and right after, probably after Joel. We're guessing that Joel was before him. And then he was right before Hosea and right after Jonah. So if you look at the timeline, Jonah was probably a decade or so before Amos, and Hosea followed right after him. So that gives you some idea. Micah was also a contemporary of Isaiah. So Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah were all alive at about the same time, and Amos was right before them. So that's a good way to look at the timeline there. So he was a shepherd. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't part of the religious system. He was a complete outsider, just like John the Baptist, just like Jesus. They were outsiders that came into the religious system to prophesy against it. Now, that's a little bit of a misnomer, because John the Baptist and Jesus grew up in that system, but they weren't an accepted, established part of that system. But Amos was completely separate. He was a shepherd from the south who went up to the religious system of the north. Now, there was a problem. There was a problem with the religious system. When the kingdoms separated, the temple was in the south. And Jeroboam, the king of the north, didn't want his people traveling down to Jerusalem to worship in the temple, so they set up their own sites of worship in the towns of Bethel and in a place called Gilgal. So those were illicit places of worship, and we will see them being condemned by Amos as we go through the through the book here. Now, there were a lot of good things happening in Israel. Jeroboam was a king, I believe, for 42 years there. And Uzziah was a king for quite a while in the south. So there was a lot of stability in the political leadership. There was economic prosperity. The borders were expanding. On the surface, everything was clicking for both Israel and Judah. But as we have come to know over time, prosperity breeds corruption. When the nation prospers, the religious element of the nation suffers. So you might look at it this way, like Jesus condemned the rich. He said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. Now, why did he say that? Because there's nothing inherently wrong with wealth, right? God distributed wealth to many of the people in the Old Testament. Abraham was wealthy. Job was wealthy. Jacob and Joseph and Isaac, they were all wealthy. Wealth was a common thing among those who were leaders of God in the Old Testament. However, we also see the corruptive element of wealth. When Saul got into power, he had wealth and power, he became corrupted. When David started to experience wealth and power, he became corrupted. When Solomon became powerful and wealthy, he became corrupted. So you see the common theme, not just of the leaders, but of human beings. When you have wealth and power, what need do you have of God, right? At least in this earthly life. And this is something that I run into as a pastor. People who have money and good jobs, and they have financial success, they're prosperous, they suffer spiritually because God wants you to lean on him. He wants you to desire him. He wants you to need him because he made you for that. He made you for this relationship with him that he loves and blesses, and then we adore and worship. This is our responsibility, or this is our relationship with God. And when we are wealthy and prosperous, it turns our eyes away from God and we look at ourselves. This is the story of Peter when he was walking on water. He got out of the boat and he's standing on water, but then he looks down at his own feet and he sinks, right? And this is the story of mankind. When we are able to provide for ourselves with our own hands, we forget that God gave us that. And we start thinking, well, I'm all that. I'm everything. I can do this on my own. I don't need God. And we turn our eyes off of him. And this is what we see of the nations. The nations, Israel and Judah, they were fat and happy, right? They were still doing their religious service. They hadn't abandoned God. They were still going to the temples. They were making their sacrifices. They were doing their obligations, but they were doing it out of obligation, not out of joy or love. And that is the problem that God had. He said, look, I'm not in it. You're cutting me out of the picture. You're coming to the temple to worship me, but I'm not even in the picture when you're there. You're just going through the motions. You're just saying the words like these are magic words and magic. Just do the right stuff and I'm good. And this is the biggest problem that I have with, I would say, with Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but even in the Protestant church, you can have, I just talked about this the other night about, there's something to having the stuff in the church, right? Dressing nice for church and having a nice building and all that stuff. But that stuff, it can help direct you to God, but the danger is that it can replace God. You know, that altar table with the brass cross and the golden cups and stuff. I watched a woman show up every Sunday and just gaze at those like that was God to her. They were made out of brass. Those became idols to her. The religious rituals, I call them the 5 R's, rituals, rites, relics, rules, and regulations. All of those things can be helpful in worshiping God, but all of those things can become doors, or let's just say walls. All of those things can be walls instead of doorways to God. They can stand in the way of your relationship with God instead of leading you to Him, because they become what your religion is all about. That's what religion is. Religion is all that stuff. And you know, the reason I don't wear a suit and tie to church is because I'm dressing myself up like I'm important, and I'm not. I'm not the important element of worship. I'm just the worshiper. I'm there to remember how low and humble I am, how meaningless I am without God at all. That's what worship is. So all of that stuff can detract from your walk with God. And this is what happened in Israel and in Judah. They were doing the right stuff, but they weren't doing it with their heart. The rituals had become God to them. The rites, the relics, you know, the things of the church, the rules and the regulations, those became God instead of God Himself. And God is calling them out in the book of Amos. And God is going to go through the nations. The people of God were exploiting the poor. They were taking their land and becoming wealthy off of them. They were enslaving the debtors. Their banks and financial systems were enslaving the people, and they were perverting justice while they were offering sacrifices and keeping the festivals and singing religious songs. That those things can't be compatible. You can't oppress while you worship. Those things are like this. They don't go together. They bang against each other. And so Amos says, he quotes God in Amos 5. God says, I reject your festivals. This sounds a lot like Isaiah chapter 1, right? And Isaiah is going to come after Amos and say those same things. I hate your new moon festivals. I despise your offerings. They become a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them. Who asks of you this trampling of my courts? You've made this a tedious obligation. Just say the magic words, do the right stuff, and we're good to go. Now let's go steal that land from that guy. And you can't have a system like that. So Amos comes out. He attacks their greed, the injustice, the corruption, the sexual immorality, and the hypocrisy of their religion. Now you can see the similarities between John the Baptist and Jesus and Amos. They are aimed at the heart of the religion, trying to teach the relationship instead, the right heart instead. The message of Amos is this, that when you are God's chosen people, you can't just sit back and say, oh, I'm good. I'm all good. I did all the right stuff. No, when you are God's people, you have a greater responsibility. And while God is going to call out all the nations around them, He's going to call out Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, Moab, Judah, and Israel. While he calls out the nations around them, He singles out His own nation, because they're supposed to be His lighthouse to the world. The rest of the world is supposed to be looking at them and saying, oh, look, that's God's people over there. Look at how He's blessed them and how they respond. That's how we should be doing things. But they weren't. They were a divided kingdom, and they were worshiping calves and idols and false gods. So God is going to judge them for that. God hates religious hypocrisy. So the themes of Isaiah, I wrote these down. The themes of Isaiah that we'll be looking at is that God is sovereign over all the nations, that God hates religious hypocrisy, God defends the poor and the oppressed. There is a certainty of judgment when we go astray, but there is hope and restoration. In chapter 9 of Amos, he says, "In that day I will raise up the fallen booth of David." There's hope at the end of all of this judgment. And then we're going to take a look at why Amos matters today, because he teaches prosperity is worthless without righteousness. He warns us about religion without obedience. He warns us about ignoring the poor and the vulnerable, and about assuming that God will never judge our sin, that we're getting away with it. He doesn't see us. He doesn't care. We look at us. We're just going through the motions in the temple, but our nation is prospering. We're doing great. God won't judge us. And Amos is here to say, guess what? Guess what? Here he comes. He is coming for you. So next message, of course, tomorrow night is open mic night. But when we come back Monday, we're going to take a look at chapters 1 and 2 of Amos, and we're going to call that The Roar of the Lion. The lion is getting ready to come for his judgment day. So that's what we're going to take a look at. So, all right, everybody, that's it for tonight. Appreciate each and every one of you guys being here, and hope to see you tomorrow night for open mic night. And God bless, and have a blessed night. Good night.